Welcome to 30 Minutes of Faith. We're very happy today to have Kathy Visher with us. Kathy is a well-known Mormon Latter-day Saint musician in our community, is involved in many of the interfaith functions. You'll recognize her, and a longtime friend of mine. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for inviting me.
Now, let's start out where you were born and raised and where you grew up.
I was born actually in Northern Virginia. My father was a student at George Washington University, and so I lived there until I was 3 years old, and he finished school, and then moved to Idaho, where my parents grew up. And then when I was 6, we moved to Seattle, and that's pretty much where I did my growing up.
Did you graduate from high school in Seattle?
Yes, I did. And then I went to Brigham Young University in Provo, Utah, and loved being a student there. And then later I taught in the public schools and also taught on the faculty at the university. Really enjoyed those years.
And did you and Eben meet at BYU?
Yes, we did.
Cool.
Yes,
and you have how many children?
We have 6.
They are a wonderful group, by the way.
Well,
The
we
people
sure
who are
think
watching
so.
this won't understand that we've known each other a long time and associated closely together.
We've adopted all of our children, and they're just the light of my life.
How many grandchildren now?
7. So
Boys and girls?
2 girls and 5 boys.
Way to go.
They're wonderful.
Yeah, grandparenting's really, really good. One of the reasons I wanted you to be here today is you have helped and supported us with your children's choir and other things, being an accompanist. And I wanted to talk to you about music per se, though we'll talk about some other things. But as a little girl, were you already in love with music?
Absolutely. I sang my first solo in church at age 4, and probably the only time I've done that without some trepidation. I had no fear then. I started piano lessons at an early age. Played the flute. I think I always knew I would do a lot with music.
Music is what you wanted. Now, I know a couple of your siblings, and I know that your father knew a lot about sound.
Yes, he did.
Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Well, my father was an electrical engineer. In fact, what took our family to Seattle was that he went to work for the Boeing company. But he, on the side, was always doing sound and lights for church productions, and got into finally having his own business installing sound systems in churches and in office buildings and in homes. And Dad loved to work with his hands, and he loved the fact that his boys could help him do these installations.
So did they learn from Dad?
So they did. And in fact, he installed a sound system in one of the LDS buildings in Citrus Heights, the one on Oak Avenue. When it came from Seattle to do that. But
I want to tell you a funny story about Oak real quick, and then we'll go on. One day we got a phone call. There was something suspicious in a little closet. And we went there, and it was a little box-looking thing. The police had been called.
oh,
And you know, it was different than anything else that you would see in the church, and nobody had noticed it before. So they called the fire department. The fire department came, turned a hose on from about 75 feet away, and just blasted that thing into oblivion.
oh my.
Soaked the carpet and ruined the sheetrock and all those other things over this little box. Well, finally, when they thought it was safe to go in, you know, the police guy and the shield and everything went in, opened it up, and it was just a box somebody picked up somewhere, had a couple of erasers and a couple of pieces of chalk in it.
Oh no.
And it took us a lot of money to refix it, you know, to get everything repaired. I don't hardly ever go to Oak that I don't think about that particular situation.
Well, the world we live in now.
It is. Now, Eben is also a very good friend. You guys met as undergraduates?
I was in graduate school. He was still finishing his undergraduate degree. We met at church, and
Was it love at first sight?
I think by about the second date, I came home and told my sister, I'm either going to not see him again or I'm going to marry this guy. I wasn't sure. And he won me over pretty quickly.
Well, very good. Now, I know you have sung in the Mormon Tabernacle Choir.
I did.
I'd like to talk about that in music for a minute or two. How long did you sing?
I was there for 10 and a half years.
And did you travel with them and all the other things we hear about just in the newspaper or on TV?
Yes, I did. And I loved it. I have to tell you, my first Tabernacle Choir experience was when I was a little girl. The choir recorded the Battle Hymn of the Republic, and it was the first recording the choir had ever made that made like the top 40 you heard it on the popular radio stations. And I was learning to play the Battle Hymn of the Republic on the piano. And so one afternoon I just sat and waited for it to come on the radio to see if I could play along with the choir. And one part of it was in the same key that I had been learning it in, and I just sat there thrilled to be able to play while the choir was singing. At that time, singing was not even on the radar for me. I thought I would be a pianist or a flute player, but
What did you have to
later
do to
on.
get in the choir?
Well, it was much easier then than it is now to get in. I was majoring in voice, and a friend of mine I was still a college student, a friend of mine who was in the choir said, "You have a really good voice, you should try out for the Tabernacle Choir." And I said, "Oh, do you think I could?" And she said, "Oh yeah, I'm sure you could." And I said, "Well, maybe I'd like to do that." And she said, "Well, I talked to the director, and he'll hear you after rehearsal on Thursday night."
And the director was whom?
Richard Condy. And this was in the early 70s. And so I went and sang for him, and I think she had told him, a little bit about some of the singing that I had done at the university. Because the audition was really short. He had me sing a song, and then he played a little thing on the piano, about 8 notes, and he said, "What's that?" And I thought, is this some song that I'm supposed to recognize? I was really pretty clueless. I said, "Well, it sounds like the top half of a melodic minor scale." He said, "Yeah, that's it." And I think that's why I got in so easily, because then
You'd hear music and understand it.
and knew what was going on. So he turned to my friend and he said, "Well, bring her next Thursday night," and that was it.
Do you know the theme from the movie The Apartment?
Oh, I remember it.
Dum, bum,
Dun,
da-dum.
dun.
My mother, who could play by ear anything, after my father died, wanted to become a more accomplished pianist.
Mhm.
And she started buying sheet music that was just so covered in notes you couldn't believe it. And at the end of that song, it has a major run.
Mhm.
And we would lay in bed at night and listen to her practice that run over and over and over. And it took some weeks before she had it slick and good. Once she got that, she could just throw the sheet music away. It didn't matter, because then she could play it at that point in time. But if that song comes on the radio, it makes me tender, because we'd lay in bed and listen to her practice and practice and practice that. And our children and grandchildren will look at me like, "What's going on there?" And so you had to be there to experience all of that. Now, in our religion, we're both Latter-day Saints. Mormons we're called. Music is a big deal. We sing a lot. People get a chance to sing in solos and choirs and trios and duets and quartets. I happen to know you've played for 1 million people, because you can ask people what key would you want it played in, and then you play it that way. And that's very, very helpful. I also know you have sung an awful lot in our church. Have you sung outside of the choir and church?
Yes, I have.
And where do those opportunities come from? And why do you say, "Yeah, I want to do that"?
Oh, because I love it. I absolutely love it. I sang in, my high school choir. Once I discovered singing, my mother signed me up for some voice lessons, and I thought, what the heck, I'll do that. And I just really fell in love with it. And then my high school we did The King and I one year, and I was in that. And we did The Sound of Music the next year, and I was in that.
You've been at Music Circus, performed here at Music Circus. I'd forgotten that.
I did one show at Music Circus. When we first moved to California, I had a couple of children who really wanted to audition for Music Circus. And I wanted to have some idea of what it was like being backstage there, what the environment was like. So I thought, well, they're doing The Sound of Music. I know the show. I'll go audition. So I did. I sang in the Nuns Chorus, and everybody backstage was wonderful. After that, I had no worries about my children being part of that.
And did your children get to be part of it?
One did. The one who auditioned and was like the last one eliminated at every callback was never cast. But her younger sister, the only time she auditioned, got a part.
Got it.
So, go figure.
That's the way that goes.
But
Now, you and I have also talked about good music is a universal language. Everyone understands it. Can we talk about that a little bit more?
Yes.
Why does just a good person hear a song that, "Oh, I like that"? Why is that?
Victor Hugo said, "Music expresses that which cannot be put into words and cannot remain silent." And I think that quality of music to reach us where words can't is one of the things that makes it universal and that makes it such an important part of those of us who love music. And I think probably everyone loves some kind of music, but the way it speaks to your heart, speaks to your emotions. I think spiritual things and emotional things are so closely tied in us, in our makeup, and so music that evokes the spirit is particularly touching. But the other emotions that music creates are just incredible. If you've ever watched a silent movie, those of us who've grown up with music as the background for the movies can't imagine movies without that music in the background. And it just touches us in ways that I guess the other arts do too, but certainly more than speech ever could, I believe.
Some years ago, I stood and watched a parade in Phoenix, and lots of marching bands and lots of performing groups and lots of floats with music and all those other things. And at the very end, they had a well-known singer at the time, whose name slips me right now, but a woman sing "How Great Thou Art."
Mm.
And that whole parade route for blocks and blocks and blocks, lined with, I think, hundreds of thousands of people in downtown Phoenix. That whole city just grew deathly quiet while she sang "How Great Thou Art." And then, you don't get to clap and cheer a lot in church, normally. Boy, they cheered and screamed and whistled and slapped and did everything they could to let her know that was the highlight of the parade, we thought.
I'm sure.
My mother didn't like the Beatles on Ed Sullivan when they played "I Want to Hold Her Hand" and all those other things. And then a few years later, as they began to release "Yesterday" and "Michelle" and "The Long and Winding Road" and some of those others that were just beautiful songs, there were lyrics that she may not have necessarily agreed with that were innuendos for marijuana and a lot of other sorts of things. But the music was beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
And she would say, "My goodness, that's a beautiful song. I can't believe that's that silly long-haired group singing on Ed Sullivan, And it registered with her.
Yeah. Were you watching Ed Sullivan that night?
I was.
I was too.
I was. Thought the whole world was.
Yes, I
That
think
was
the
quite
whole
a
world
deal.
was.
Do you have music going on in your home all the time?
Well, I teach in my home 5 days a week, so there's a lot of live music going on in my home. And I don't play background music as often as I thought I would in my life, and I think my ears need a little bit of a rest, maybe a little bit of a break. But we love good music.
I keep a CD playing in my vehicle all the time, and I crank it up pretty good. I don't mean I'm rocking the intersection, but I crank it up so it's not just soft elevator music. And I'll drive from one place to the next and sort of realize I'm there.
Mm-hmm.
I got here and I listened to whoever for whatever amount of time.
Yes.
Now, these children's choruses and young adolescent choruses and things that you've done are making great sounds in a lot of different places. Why did you decide to do that?
Well, through the church, I've conducted a number of musical productions of usually teenagers, and just because I've been asked to do that, and I love it. I mean, I love teaching music. I love seeing the light bulbs go off in kids' heads when they get it, whether it's playing the piano or whether it's singing, and also the feeling that they get when they realize that they've achieved something great musically and they've touched people's hearts. That's such a thrill to me to see that happen to them, because I remember that happening to me when I was growing up, and I wish I could go back and thank all the people that influenced me musically as a child, and as a teenager particularly. So I've done conducted a number of musical productions through the church. My Folsom Lake Children's Choir, which is now the Folsom Lake Youth Choir, because a number of those children have grown up and they haven't left, so we have some older kids now. that began because a friend of mine was homeschooling her children, and she was with 3 or 4 other moms, and she asked me if I could come to one of their homes once a week and teach a music class. And I said, well, how about a choir? And she said, that'd be great. And that was the beginning of the Folsom Lake Youth Choir in 1999. And then we've added to that. It's not a huge group. We have about 30, but I love that. Every year I think, am I really up to doing this for another year? And I can't walk away from it. I just really enjoy the kids. I love watching them learn. I love trying out new music with them, and I love going back to the old favorites and just trying to help them love music the way I do and develop enough skill that they can feel really good about what they're doing. I love the little proverb supposedly from Zimbabwe. It's a refrigerator magnet that I bought in an airport. But it says, if you can walk, you can dance. If you can talk, you can sing. And I really believe that. And that doesn't mean that everyone can sing professionally, but I do believe every voice can become a singing voice. And I believe that every ear can be trained. I had an experience when I was teaching music at BYU, and I was teaching classes for elementary education majors who had to take a basic music class so that if they were teaching in their classroom someday and didn't have a music specialist, they would be able to teach some music. And I was in my 30s, and a man who was probably in his 40s came into my class, wanted to add the class a week late, and he was pretty intimidating. And he said, you know, they won't let me student teach until I take this class, and I tried to get out of it, and they won't let me out of it. It's required. I have to take it. And he said, but I don't sing. I don't do music. And so I want to sign up for your class. And I, first of all, had to decide if I would let him add a week late, and I decided I would. One of the requirements, which was not my requirement, it was a department requirement, was that he get up in front of the class and teach a song to the class. And so I said, this is what you'll have to do. And he said, I know. He said, but I don't sing. I can't do that. And I said, well, it's not my requirement, it's the department's. But long story short, I invited him to come work with me privately after class and see what his voice could do. And we found a range of about 5 notes that he could sing in tune, go higher or lower than that, and he just got lost. But he could do that. So then we found a song that was right within that range, and he taught it to the class, and he passed the class. And I've worked with others that were just sure they couldn't sing. Sometimes it's just as simple as once I can help someone start singing and using their voice, and then sing along with them and say, can you match what I'm doing, especially if it's a female voice? And they do, and then I say, well, you just sang in tune. I did? Is that what that feels like? Is that what that sounds like? And that thrills me. And of course, I love working with the students who learn quickly and easily. That's a lot of fun for me. But it's really fun to take the ones who just have no confidence and help them along. I get on my soapbox about people who tell children, you can't sing. Or, oh, no, our family can't sing. We don't do that. Or you're a monotone. That's the worst one. Because no one is a monotone. Nobody talks like this all the time. Nobody has just one note one pitch that they can speak on. Everybody's voice can move up and down. And so everybody can sing. And the act of singing, I love music in all of its forms, but the act of singing, of processing those words, especially when we talk about sacred music, processing that through your own mind and through your own body just brings you something that nothing else does. And I love to help people be able to do that.
When we were in high school and we would leave our little town to go play a game somewhere, on the way back to town, you had to roll the windows down on the bus and sing the school song.
Of course.
As loud as you could. You were coming back into town. And a boy who was a class younger than I am, but was a good athlete and an integral part of our teams, just sang terrible. And we were sort of glad if we could sit somewhere not next to him.
Uh-huh.
Along about 10th or 11th grade, one of the other teachers, who was not a music teacher but had a nice singing voice, just said to him one day, stay after class and we're going to learn the school song. And they just sang it side by side, man's voice to man's voice, I think. they did that for 2 or 3 weeks, and one day we were coming back into town from somewhere, and he was singing the school song. He was singing it really well, and we couldn't believe it. And it was fun to watch that transformation, and he was thrilled that after several years of not being able to sing it, he could.
Oh, I bet he was.
I want to ask you about another observation. I noticed that when you put children or young people's choirs together, generally speaking, you get more girls than boys. When you get older choirs that are singing, you might still get more women, that might be, but you get a lot of men who just want to come and use their bass voice, and they just want to do it because it's pleasurable and good. What's your take on that?
I don't know that I don't know why, but it's certainly true in our society that no one makes fun of girls for wanting to sing, but people make fun of boys
Well, that's a good
for
point.
wanting to do that. And in fact, I know a little boy right now that has a beautiful singing voice, but is just a little afraid to let peers at school and other people know that he likes to sing because of the teasing. My own brothers, growing up in a very musical home, my mother and my sisters are all very musical. My brothers weren't so much. My dad wasn't so much. But
they work with sound.
But they work with sound. So when I was growing up, we would have productions, particularly church productions. My dad was the sound and light guy, and my mother directed the music, and we kids sang in those.
That was that.
And that was it. But as my brothers got older, most of them began singing in high school. And I think after that voice changes and you go through that awkward time.
Well, that's a good point.
And then it starts feeling a little more comfortable, and especially if there's a good high school musical program, so that you feel like you're part of something that's cool and not something that's stupid. Then a lot of guys get involved there and really enjoy that.
Now, I go to a lot of different meetings and services all the time, and they sing a variety of songs. I went to a early morning mass at one of the Catholic parishes just last week, and about 60 people at morning mass. It was an 8 o'clock mass. It was early. And, the sisters just sing beautifully, and the brethren just move their lips a little bit,
That's not unusual.
and that translates to our, where we go to church. But also not too long ago, I went to a Tongan group, and the women sing baritone and tenor. Mm-hmm. And they sing the old Christian hymns, and boy, they sing it for all it's worth. And because they're singing baritone or tenor, you can't tell without turning around to really look and see whether that's coming out of a man or a woman.
Right.
But everybody goes to church generally because they like to sing. There's some great song, they love Onward Christian Soldiers, mm-hmm. or the Battle Hymn of the Republic or whatever. Mm-hmm. So looking at religion itself, because that's what we do in the Interfaith Council, where do you see music as a role player or chief player in religious services? Knowing that there are some religions that don't do music, but generally speaking.
Those that I'm familiar with, I think it's huge. It really does help us feel the Spirit of the Lord when we are singing, when we're participating in that. And I can't imagine, for myself, I can't imagine religion without music. But I think that's, you read all through the Old Testament, the references to music. I mean, it's always been a part of Judeo-Christian worship. And I think that's because of the feelings that it brings up for us. For instance, when you talked about your mother practicing the piano late at night, and you hear the apartment now, and it just it transports you back to that time. I had the same experience. My mother used to practice the piano and the viola at night when we kids were in bed. I loved listening to that. And if I hear those pieces now, I'm back in my bedroom in Seattle when I was 8 years old, just loving that. And I think that sacred music helps us remember feelings that we had possibly before we were born.
Well
or
said.
At least feelings that we've had in church all through our lives.
Heavenly choirs all about us.
Exactly. When I was a high school student, I experienced some doubts about my own beliefs, and I had some friends who were trying to tell me the flaws that they had heard about Mormonism and about Christianity in general. And I remember wondering, what do I believe? Do I believe this? I've always thought I did. And I was in a meeting one time where it was a meeting of all youth, but none of my close friends were there, and I felt, it was a huge group, but I felt really kind of out of place and a little upset. And we sang a song about the Spirit of the Lord burning like a fire. And I thought, no, it's not. And I uncharacteristically, for me, I did not sing the first couple of verses of that hymn. And by the time we got to the third verse, it just was moving me, and I started singing. And by the time we got to the fourth verse, I was actually very teary and couldn't sing, and realized what was coming to me was, you do know, and you always have. And I think it's not coincidence that music was a part of that awakening in me when I was really searching for answers to my own beliefs.
That's a nice story, thank you. If you could wave a magic wand and fix or correct or replace something in society that would be beneficial, what do you think that would be?
More singing.
More music.
Lots of other things too. More music, but specifically more singing. Actually using our own voices.
Good answer. When we finish here, we'll have to take a informal survey around the room here and see who really sings. Thanks so much for being with us. It's nice to sit and visit with you.
You're very welcome.
The half hour just speeds by quickly, but thank you very much.
You're very welcome. Thanks for asking me.
Take care.
All right.